Imagine a weapon capable of reaching inside one of the most heavily guarded facilities on Earth, a facility buried under concrete, ringed by anti-aircraft guns, sealed off from the outside world, and physically tearing its machinery apart from within. No missiles, no fighter jets screaming overhead, no soldiers crossing a border, no explosion the world could see coming. Just code. In the summer of 2010, a handful of antivirus researchers scattered across the globe started noticing something strange. A small piece of software was quietly spreading through industrial computers in Iran. At first, it looked like nothing special, just another infection among the thousands analyzed every single day. But the closer they looked, the less sense it made. This wasn't malware built to steal credit card numbers. It wasn't ransomware demanding a payout. It barely even tried to spread very far. Instead, it seemed to be hunting, searching obsessively for one very specific kind of machine, sitting in one very specific kind of place. And when investigators finally understood what they were looking at, it would change how the entire world thought about war. This is the story of Stuxnet, the first cyberweapon in history confirmed to leap off a screen and into the physical world, destroying machinery using nothing but software. A weapon so quiet that the engineers operating its target had no idea anything was wrong because their control panels kept telling them everything was fine. This is the story of a worm that infiltrated one of the most isolated nuclear facilities on the planet, set a national enrichment program back by months, and opened a door that has never closed since, the era of cyber warfare. To understand how it happened, we need to go back further than 2010. We need to go back to the politics, the fear, and the impossible choices that made a weapon like this almost inevitable. Part 1. The world before Stuxnet. In the early 2000s, intelligence agencies around the world became convinced that Iran was building something it had always denied: the capability to produce nuclear weapons. Iran insisted its nuclear program existed for one reason only: electricity, peaceful energy for a growing population. And on paper, nuclear power and nuclear weapons start from the exact same process, which is part of what made the situation so dangerous. The technology needed to enrich uranium for a power plant is frighteningly close to the technology needed to enrich uranium for a bomb. The difference isn't really the machine, it's how far you push it, and for how long. At the center of that process sits a machine called a centrifuge. Picture a tall, narrow cylinder spinning at a speed faster than the engine of a fighter jet, tens of thousands of rotations every single minute. Inside, uranium gas spins so violently that the heavier, less useful atoms drift to the outer wall, while the lighter, more valuable atoms concentrate near the center. Run that gas through enough centrifuges, linked together in long chains called cascades, and you slowly increase the concentration of a rare uranium type capable of sustaining a nuclear chain reaction. Low levels of enrichment can fuel a power plant. High levels can fuel a weapon. Iran was running thousands of these centrifuges at a facility called Natanz, and the world wasn't sure how far the country intended to go. For years, the United States, Israel, and European powers tried diplomacy, sanctions, negotiations, United Nations resolutions. None of it slowed the centrifuges down for long. That left two options on the table, and both were terrifying. The first was a military strike, bombing the facility outright. But Natanz wasn't sitting in an open field. Its most critical halls were buried dozens of feet underground, hardened against exactly this kind of attack. A strike powerful enough to reach it risked killing civilians, triggering a regional war, and uniting a divided Iranian public behind a government it might otherwise have resented. Israeli and American military planners studied the option for years. Nobody loved it. The second option was to simply wait and risk Iran crossing the finish line to a weapon while the world's diplomats were still drafting their next strongly worded letter. Somewhere between those two impossible choices, a third path was apparently born, one that required no bombs, no boots on the ground, and for years, left no fingerprints at all. What if you could break the centrifuges without anyone knowing they'd been broken? What if the weapon wasn't made of steel, but of software? Part 2, the discovery. In June of 2010, a small antivirus company in Belarus called VirusBlock Ada was called in to investigate a strange problem. Computers belonging to a client in Iran kept crashing and rebooting for no obvious reason. When the company's analysts dug into the files causing the chaos, they found something that made them pause. The malware was exploiting a flaw in how Windows displayed shortcut icons, the small picture you see representing a file before you've even opened it. Just looking at an infected USB drive in Windows Explorer without clicking anything was enough to silently trigger the infection. Nobody had ever seen this particular flaw exploited in the wild before. In cybersecurity, a previously unknown software flaw like this is called a zero-day vulnerability. 0 day, because the moment it's discovered, the software's creator has had exactly 0 days to fix it. 0 days are valuable and rare. Most serious malware uses 1, if it's lucky enough to have access to one at all. This new threat had 1. That alone made it worth a closer look. But what investigators found next was far more shocking. As researchers at larger firms, Symantec, then Kaspersky Lab, then independent experts around the world, began tearing the code apart, they discovered it wasn't relying on 1 0 day. It was carrying 4 previously unknown, unpatched vulnerabilities bundled into a single piece of malware. To put that in perspective, a serious, well-funded cybercriminal operation might burn through 1 0 day in a major campaign because they're so expensive and difficult to find. Whoever built this had 4 to spare and used them almost casually, the way someone might hand out spare keys. That wasn't normal. That wasn't even close to normal. And the file itself was enormous compared to typical malware of the time, around 0.5 megabyte, when most malicious code tried to stay as small and inconspicuous as possible. Inside that bulk, researchers found components written for entirely different purposes, layered on top of each other. A worm to spread itself, a rootkit to hide itself, and buried deep inside, code designed to talk directly to industrial machinery. Researchers gave the threat a name by combining fragments of file names found inside its own code, stub and imrxnet, and the world came to know it as Stuxnet. The deeper the analysts dug, the more an uncomfortable picture started to form. This wasn't the work of cyber criminals chasing money. The amount of time, money, and stolen secrets required to build something like this pointed somewhere else entirely, toward an operation with resources that simply didn't exist outside of a small handful of governments on Earth. But the analysts studying the code from antivirus labs in the United States and Europe could only see what the malware did on a Windows computer. They had no idea, yet, what it was actually trying to destroy. That answer would come from a place nobody expected. A quiet German industrial security consultant working largely alone, staring at code that nobody else seemed to fully understand. We'll get to him, but first, you need to understand exactly how this thing worked, because the engineering involved is, frankly, one of the most impressive feats of offensive software ever documented. Part 3: Anatomy of a Digital Weapon. Before we go further, let's slow down and define a few things, because understanding this is the key to everything that follows. Malware is simply any software designed to cause harm, to steal information, damage systems, spy on someone, or sabotage a target. It's an umbrella term, covering everything from simple email scams to nation-state weapons. A worm is a specific type of malware that doesn't need a human to click run every time it spreads. Once it's active, it copies itself from machine to machine across a network, completely on its own, like a biological virus jumping from host to host without asking permission. Most worms are loud, clumsy, fast. They spread as far and as aggressively as possible. But Stuxnet was the opposite. It was engineered to be patient, selective, and almost eerily quiet. And that patience starts with how it got inside its target in the first place. And here, the story takes its first truly clever turn. Natanz, the Iranian facility at the center of this story, was air-gapped. That means its most sensitive control systems were not connected to the internet at all. A deliberate security measure meant to make remote hacking physically impossible. You can't hack what you can't reach. So whoever built Stuxnet didn't try to reach it remotely. They went around the gap entirely, using the one thing that always crosses an air gap eventually: a human being with a USB flash drive. The working theory, supported by the malware's own design, is that Stuxnet was planted on USB drives that eventually made their way directly, or through several unwitting hands, into computers connected to the Natanz facility. possibly carried in by outside contractors or engineers servicing the plant's equipment. And the moment one of those drives was plugged into a vulnerable Windows machine, the shortcut icon flaw we mentioned earlier did its job, and the infection began, without the user clicking anything at all. From there, the worm spread laterally across the local network, hopping between computers using multiple methods, including another flaw in how Windows printers shared documents across a network. Each new machine it touched, it quietly evaluated. Is this the system I'm looking for? If not, it did nothing. It stayed hidden. It waited. It spread. That hiding was its own masterpiece of engineering. To install itself deep inside Windows without triggering antivirus software, Stuxnet used drivers, small pieces of software that let an operating system talk to hardware. But these drivers had been digitally signed with what looked like legitimate security certificates from two real Taiwanese electronics companies. A digital certificate is essentially cryptographic proof that says this software really was made by the company it claims to be from and hasn't been tampered with. Windows trusts signed drivers far more than unsigned ones, and somehow, the people behind Stuxnet had gotten their hands on legitimate private signing keys belonging to real companies. Keys that should have been locked away, never exposed, and used them to make malicious code look completely trustworthy to the operating system. Think about what that single detail tells you. This wasn't a lone hacker in a basement. Acquiring stolen certificate keys from two separate companies, on top of 4 unknown zero-day vulnerabilities, on top of deep insider knowledge of industrial control systems, requires serious money, serious patience, and serious access. Every layer of this thing was a clue pointing towards state-level resources, even before anyone knew which state. And here's the detail that made Stuxnet truly unprecedented at the time. Most of its code wasn't even built to attack Windows computers at all. Windows was just the hallway. The actual target was waiting at the end of it. A type of computer most people have never heard of, sitting inside factories, power plants, and refineries all over the world. That target is where this story stops being just a hacking story and becomes something genuinely unique in the history of warfare. Part 4. The secret target. Inside Natanz, far below ground, rows upon rows of centrifuges spun in long cascades, enriching uranium gas. But these machines were not controlled by a person standing in the room turning a dial. They were controlled by small, ruggedized industrial computers called PLCs, programmable logic controllers. A PLC is essentially a tiny, dedicated computer whose entire job is to control physical machinery. Open a valve, adjust a motor's speed, read a sensor, close a relay. They are not flashy, and most people will never see one, but they quietly run an enormous portion of the physical world around you. Water treatment plants, oil pipelines, elevators, traffic lights, manufacturing lines, and yes, uranium enrichment cascades. Sitting above the PLCs is a broader monitoring layer called a SCADA system, supervisory control and data acquisition. Think of SCADA as the control room dashboard. The screens, graphs, and alarms that let a human operator see what every machine on the factory floor is doing in real time and step in if something looks wrong. At Natanz, the PLCs running the centrifuge cascades were manufactured by Siemens, a German industrial giant, and programmed using Siemens software called Step 7. And this detail mattered enormously, because Stuxnet's creators clearly knew this specific Siemens hardware intimately. Not from a manual, but from deep, hands-on familiarity that suggested either insider access or an extraordinarily well-resourced testing environment built specifically to study it. For months, Stuxnet silently traveled through any Windows computer it touched, checking one simple question again and again. Does this machine have Siemens Step 7 software installed? And is it connected to a very specific configuration of industrial hardware? If the answer was no, the worm did almost nothing destructive. It simply tried to spread a little further, completely harmless to the vast majority of computers it ever touched. This is part of why it took so long to notice. Across the world on millions of ordinary PCs, Stuxnet was essentially sleeping. But if the answer was yes, if this machine matched the precise hardware fingerprint of Natanz's centrifuge control systems, everything changed. The worm had found exactly what it had been built, at enormous cost to find. And what happened next is the single most remarkable part of this entire story. Part 5. How Stuxnet destroyed physical machines. Here's where Stuxnet stopped being clever malware and became something the world had never confirmed seeing before. A weapon that turned digital instructions into physical destruction. The centrifuges at Natanz needed to spin within an extremely precise, narrow speed range to function safely and effectively, fast enough to separate uranium isotopes. But not so fast that the immense rotational stress tore the machine apart. Their speed was controlled by devices called frequency converters, which regulated the electrical current feeding each centrifuge's motor. Stuxnet's final payload targeted those frequency converters directly through the Siemens PLCs that managed them. And it did something almost diabolical in its design. First, it spent time silently recording for roughly 2 to 3 weeks. The malware simply listened, capturing what normal operating conditions actually looked like across the cascade. Standard sensor readings, standard speeds, standard pressures, the everyday rhythm of a healthy facility. Then, once it had a perfect recording of normal, it struck. Stuxnet began secretly altering the speed commands sent to the centrifuges, pushing some of them to spin dangerously fast, reportedly more than 1,400 hertz, far beyond their safe operating limit, before later cycling them down to abnormally slow speeds. This repeated stress, applied gradually and intermittently over months rather than all at once, caused unpredictable wear and catastrophic failures throughout the cascade. Centrifuges cracked, some reportedly destroyed themselves outright. Here is the part that should genuinely stop you in your tracks. While all of this was happening, the worm simultaneously fed the recorded loop of normal, healthy readings back to the SCADA monitoring system in the control room. The human engineers staring at their screens saw steady speeds, calm graphs, and routine status lights. Every number told them their equipment was operating exactly as it should be. It wasn't a glitch. It wasn't an alarm silenced by human error. The data on the screen was, in a very real sense, a recording of the past being replayed as the present. A digital magic trick performed on the one group of people whose entire job was to watch for exactly this kind of failure. Engineers at Natanz reportedly spent extended periods replacing centrifuges that kept inexplicably failing with no clear root cause they could identify from inside their own control systems. Estimates of the damage vary, but assessments from nuclear policy researchers suggest Stuxnet may have destroyed close to 1,000 centrifuges and delayed Iran's enrichment progress by a period likely measured in months, possibly longer, all without a single explosion, a single casualty, or a single soldier ever setting foot near the facility. The breakthrough in actually understanding this mechanism, by the way, didn't come primarily from the giant antivirus labs with their massive budgets. It came largely from Ralph Langner, an independent German industrial control systems expert who became fixated on the Siemens-specific portions of the code that other researchers had mostly skipped past. Working with a small team, largely on his own time, Langner pieced together what the PLC payload was actually designed to do to real machinery, and was among the first to publicly state what so many had started to suspect but hadn't dared say out loud. This was almost certainly built to sabotage Iran's nuclear program, and almost certainly built by a nation-state, not a criminal group. The world had just witnessed proof of something military strategists had only theorized about for years, that lines of code, properly aimed, could achieve what once required a bomb. Part 6. Who built Stuxnet? This is the part of the story where we need to be especially careful, because no government has ever formally and officially claimed responsibility for Stuxnet. What we have instead is an enormous body of circumstantial evidence, investigative journalism, and informed expert analysis, and it's important to treat each piece honestly for what it is. The technical sophistication alone narrowed the suspect list dramatically. 4 zero-day vulnerabilities, stolen certificate keys from real companies, intimate insider-level knowledge of a specific Siemens industrial configuration, and a multi-year operation requiring sustained funding and testing. This profile pointed toward a small number of nations with both the motive to sabotage Iran's nuclear program and the cyber capability to attempt it. In 2012, New York Times journalist David Sanger published reporting based on conversations with multiple anonymous current and former American officials. describing a covert operation reportedly codenamed Operation Olympic Games. According to that reporting, the operation began under the Bush administration and continued under the Obama administration as a joint effort between the United States and Israel, specifically intended to sabotage Iran's nuclear enrichment capability using cyberweapons, with Stuxnet as one of its tools. Separately, leaked classified documents and statements from cybersecurity researchers studying related malware families, including tools that appeared to share code, infrastructure, or design philosophy with Stuxnet, added further circumstantial weight to the idea that this was a sophisticated, well-resourced allied intelligence effort, rather than the work of any single rogue actor. It's worth being clear about what we can and can't say with confidence. We can say, with very high confidence, backed by extensive forensic analysis, that Stuxnet was the product of a nation-state level operation. The complexity simply leaves no other realistic explanation. We can say that credible investigative journalism has pointed specifically toward American and Israeli involvement. What we cannot say, because no government has ever officially confirmed it under their own name, is that this constitutes absolute courtroom-grade proof of exactly who built every component or exactly how the operation was structured behind closed doors. What we do know for certain is what happened next. Because at some point, possibly through a software update gone wrong or a contractor's laptop later connected to the open internet, Stuxnet escaped its intended target. It spread beyond Iran's borders, infecting computers in dozens of countries around the world. It hadn't been designed to spread that widely, and that mistake, that single moment of an air-gapped weapon breaching its own gap, is very likely the exact reason the entire world eventually found out it existed at all. A weapon built for absolute secrecy had, through its own success at spreading, written its own discovery into history. Part 7. Why Stuxnet Changed History. Before Stuxnet, cyber warfare existed mostly in theory, in think tank papers, military doctrine drafts, and Hollywood scripts. Governments worried about it, prepared for it, occasionally launched smaller espionage operations through it, but nobody had publicly confirmed proof of malware physically destroying a piece of critical infrastructure in another sovereign nation. Stuxnet changed that, permanently. And the ripple effects went far beyond Iran's nuclear program. Military doctrine shifted. Cyber capabilities, once treated as a support function for traditional espionage, were increasingly elevated to a standalone domain of warfare, alongside land, sea, air, and space. Major militaries around the world significantly expanded dedicated cyber command structures in the years that followed, treating offensive and defensive cyber operations as a core strategic priority rather than a niche specialty. Industrial security woke up to a threat it had largely ignored. For decades, the people who designed PLCs and SCADA systems had operated under a quiet assumption. Nobody would bother building malware this specialized to attack equipment this obscure because the audience capable of even understanding it was so small. Stuxnet proved that assumption catastrophically wrong and triggered a wave of new investment in industrial cybersecurity that continues to this day, as facility operators race to understand just how exposed their own obscure equipment really was. Diplomatically, it added a strange, almost unspoken new tool to the geopolitical toolbox. A capability that let nations cause real, physical, strategic damage to an adversary, while maintaining enough deniability to avoid the kind of retaliation a conventional military strike would invite. That ambiguity is, in some ways, more unsettling than a confirmed attack would have been, because it lowered the threshold for what a government might be willing to attempt. And perhaps most importantly, Stuxnet served as a working blueprint, proof of concept that this kind of attack was achievable. Once one team of engineers somewhere on Earth demonstrated it could be done, the knowledge that it was possible could never be erased. Every well-funded intelligence service and military on the planet took notice, and many quietly began their own programs aimed at developing similar capabilities of their own. Stuxnet didn't start cyber warfare, but it proved undeniably that cyber warfare had already arrived. And the world has been racing to catch up to that reality ever since. Part 8. Could it happen again? The short, uncomfortable answer is it already has, in smaller and different ways, and the conditions that made Stuxnet possible haven't gone away. If anything, they've spread. In 2015 and again in 2016, attackers using malware that researchers named Indestroyer struck Ukraine's power grid, briefly cutting electricity to parts of the country in what's widely considered the first confirmed cyber attack to directly cause a power outage. In 2017, a piece of malware called Triton was discovered targeting the safety shutdown systems of an industrial plant in the Middle East, software specifically designed to interfere with the very systems meant to prevent catastrophic accidents, raising the terrifying possibility of an attack designed not just to disrupt a facility, but to disable the safeguards that keep workers alive. The pattern is clear, and it should concern anyone paying attention. The playbook Stuxnet wrote, understand the specific industrial hardware, find your way past the air gap, manipulate the physical process while feeding operators false readings is no longer secret. It's documented in research papers, conference talks, and security training programs around the world. The same knowledge that helps defenders protect critical infrastructure today is unavoidably the same knowledge an attacker could study to plan a future one. And the targets keep multiplying. Power grids, water treatment plants, oil and gas pipelines, hospitals, transportation networks. Modern society runs on an enormous interconnected web of industrial control systems, many of them decades old, originally designed in an era when nobody imagined they'd ever need to worry about a malicious worm finding its way onto their network. That's precisely why cybersecurity has grown from a niche IT concern into one of the most critical disciplines of the 21st century, and why the people studying it today, including possibly you watching this right now, may end up playing a direct role in defending the infrastructure that the rest of us depend on, without ever thinking about it. Part 9. Stuxnet's Children, WannaCry, NotPetya, and SolarWinds. Stuxnet didn't just inspire future attackers technically, it reshaped what cyberweapons were even understood to be capable of. A few of its descendants are worth knowing, if only to see how differently they each chose to use the door Stuxnet kicked open. WannaCry, which tore through hundreds of thousands of computers across more than 150 countries in 2017, took a completely different approach. Rather than Stuxnet's surgical, months-long precision aimed at one facility, WannaCry was loud, fast, and indiscriminate ransomware, encrypting victims' files and demanding payment. It spread using a leaked, stolen exploit rather than custom-built 0 days. It crippled hospitals, including parts of Britain's National Health Service, purely through speed and scale rather than subtlety. NotPetya, unleashed later that same year, and widely attributed by Western governments to Russian military intelligence, looked like ransomware on the surface, but was actually something far more destructive underneath. A wiper designed to permanently destroy data with no real way to pay for its return. Primarily aimed at Ukraine, but causing billions of dollars of collateral damage to multinational companies worldwide who happen to share network connections with Ukrainian businesses. SolarWinds, uncovered in late 2020, took yet another path entirely, a patient supply chain compromise, where attackers, later attributed by US intelligence agencies to Russia's SVR Foreign Intelligence Service, quietly inserted malicious code into legitimate software updates from a trusted IT management company, turning routine software updates into a Trojan horse that compromised numerous US government agencies and private corporations simultaneously. What separates Stuxnet from all three is precision of intent. WannaCry and NotPetya prioritized speed and scale over secrecy. SolarWinds prioritized broad, quiet access for long-term espionage. Stuxnet alone was engineered for one specific, narrow, physical outcome: to make a precise category of machine in a precise facility fail while everyone watching believed nothing was wrong, and to do so for years before anyone noticed. That combination of physical destruction, surgical precision, and prolonged stealth remains, even now, one of a kind. For all of human history, warfare has needed a body to cross a border, a missile to streak across a sky, something visible the moment it begins. Stuxnet proved that an entire new category of conflict could begin with nothing more dramatic than someone plugging in a USB drive and could cause real physical, strategic destruction without a single visible act of war ever taking place. That's the part of this story that should stay with you longest, not the 4 0 days or the stolen certificates, or the spinning centrifuges. Impressive as all of that is. It's the idea that the next major conflict between nations might not announce itself with an explosion at all. It might announce itself with nothing, with silence, with a control room full of engineers staring at screens that say everything is fine, while somewhere beneath their feet, with something is already going terribly wrong. Stuxnet was discovered because it made a mistake. It spread further than its creators intended and slipped into the light. There is no guarantee that the next one will be so careless. It may already exist, sitting quietly inside a network somewhere in the world, waiting for its moment. The good news is that the same knowledge that builds a weapon like this is the knowledge that defends against one, and that knowledge is no longer locked away in classified government labs. It's available to anyone curious enough to go looking for it. Anyone willing to learn how industrial systems actually work, how networks actually fail, and how attackers actually think. The digital battlefield of the future is already being built. The only real question left is who will be standing ready to defend it. If you enjoyed this video, drop a like, share it with someone who needs to see this, subscribe and comment your thoughts. I read every one. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.